So I get the opportunity again to welcome another dear friend and our second guest, Ilan Chavoya. Ilan is the outreach chair of the Milwaukee Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression and the secretary of the National Alliance. Ilan organizes for the national liberation of oppressed people in Milwaukee, especially those impacted by police crimes. He dedicates his energy to being with the people of Milwaukee and responding to the issues that matter most to them, such as Palestinian liberation and putting an end to police crimes. Over the past year, I have served with Ilan on the Wisconsin Coalition for Justice in Palestine. It's been an incredible honor, and I really thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me. I'm very grateful to have been given this opportunity and grateful for having met Dina over this past year around Palestinian solidarity work and to have been trusted to be invited to speak to something like this today. So I'm very grateful for that.
Mm.
Um, I'll explain a little bit of who I am, the work we do in Milwaukee Alliance, and how it ties to today's themes of, ending militarism, that culture, that environment, and transitioning, right, working and towards peace and, environmental justice as well, right, and environmental sustainability, and how the work of the Milwaukee Alliance ties to that. So, I'm born and raised in Milwaukee. I'm a Chicano. My parents came from Mexico shortly before I was born, and so I grew up in Milwaukee. I grew up in what is called the south side of Milwaukee, which is where it's predominantly Mexican, working class background these days. From when I was born, there used to be a lot of the Polish neighborhood. But before then, right, the histories of the different nations who lived there, right, in Milwaukee, right, the Potawatomi, there were the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, and many more. And so it's just the more I grew up in my city, I come to, it has a lot of issues, as I'll get into some of them around primarily policing. But it's definitely a city that I feel rooted in, that I love, that despite all of those things that are difficult to accept, I embrace and recognize my role and responsibility to work towards a brighter future, right? And that's really what drew me back to organizing. Um, and so I had started my doctoral program in philosophy, and I had transitioned over to for the first time in my life, moving away from Milwaukee to Chicago because I was at Northwestern. But then a little something that some of you might recognize it as COVID happened, and I was like, oh, everything's virtual now. So I came back to Milwaukee at around March, since everything was virtual. But then around that time, things started to boil a bit more and more. And then May of 2020 happened with the brutal killing of George Floyd. And in Milwaukee, things really picked up. A lot of the work picked up, and a lot of the organizing. There was a lot of energy, as we all remember. And so I met a group of people there who were the Milwaukee Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And there was a small group of people, but very committed. And that's something that stood out to me, the commitment that people have, right? Oftentimes people come into the organizing space thinking it's like a cool fad or something, but they lack that sort of commitment to being with one another, to going through the boring, mundane aspects of organizing in order to be successful at doing the big things that people seem to think that's all organizing is about, right? But that's just a small fraction. And so I came to them and I started organizing with them. And then I started learning about the organization. So I've been with them since 2020. Like I said, the organization itself was refounded in 2019 as the National Alliance, and the Milwaukee chapter being one of the original chapters from way back in 1973, which is when it was first founded as a national alliance. It was founded shortly after the struggle to free Angela Davis and the Black Panthers involved in her case. Many of you may remember that case where she was imprisoned, and there was a national and international struggle to free her and those involved in her case. And so out of that, there was a lot of a recognition that there was a lot more work to be done to free a lot of the political prisoners, right? And to this day, the United States has so many political prisoners. You can just look at Leonard Peltier, right? I think he's the longest incarcerated political prisoner we have in this country, people like Muma Abdul-Jabbar, so many folks like that. And so the Milwaukee line or the National Alliance really worked on that, but it also started working towards questions around policing, right? And so the demand that we have is the demand called community control of the police, where the people form democratically elected councils to answer questions about policing themselves, of who polices their neighborhoods, of if they want police in their neighborhoods, ability to control the budget, which I'll get into a little bit of how the budgets really reflect, I think, the national budget of this country, which is trillions and trillions, right, for war and occupation. We see that play in our cities where it's hundreds of millions going towards policing and towards this sort of, what they call like wars on crime, wars on drugs, or what we consider wars on poor and oppressed peoples. Um, so this, democratically elected body would be able to hold police accountable themselves, right? But that requires a tremendous amount of political power, of economic power, of just community power, right? That we unfortunately, it's been so devastated in our communities, right? Like how much our cities, our neighborhoods have been dismantled over many, many years of just vicious repression, right? You can see it in how our schools have been decimated. And this wasn't just through Act 10, right? But it's something that's happened for many decades. How it is that our infrastructure has just become terrible. A lot of the jobs, I know I saw Steve in the audience, I'm a proud union member with Steve in AFD 212. But the jobs in Milwaukee have all gone away, right? But when we see all of those resources that are life-affirming resources in our communities, it's a relationship there of as those get underfunded. It started primarily around the 70s in Milwaukee and other major cities. In the 70s, when the funding for those goes down, the funding for policing goes up. So then it becomes a society that's built on creating this system of quote unquote safety through policing rather than safety through these life affirming institutions that we so desperately need, that we're seeing the ramifications of it today, right? 50 years later of there's food deserts all around us. I know the previous speaker spoke about the importance of nourishment, right? That comes from healthy food, that comes from healthy education, that comes from healthy homes, right? And so a lot of that is intertwined with how it is that policing works here, just through the economic sense. So that's a little bit of that, of how our work, even though it's around policing, it really ties, we have to understand it, how linked it is to all of these other struggles that we have. And so, like I said, we view the problem of militarism in the policing. This shows up in many ways. I already said, right, a little bit about how the budget, right, the US society is one that views everyone as an enemy. And that's something that was embedded from the very beginning, right? They come in as they expanded westward. All the indigenous peoples were viewed as enemies. My people, right, the Chicanos, the Mexicans, they were viewed as enemies in that Mexican-American War, and that resulted in the annexation of the entire Southwest region, which is where the Chicanos are from, right? And so there's that. And you see that policing has its links to those ways of understanding society, and what there's this sort of civilization that we have to protect from these vicious groups of people. And that gets embedded today, right? You hear the same narratives of how it is that the police view themselves as this thin blue line between civilization and something else, right? They might not call it barbarism as they once did, but they depict it as such, right? They say all these criminals, that's the next term that they use today, right? To criminalize all the populations. And we know who they criminalize. They criminalize Black, brown, indigenous, and poor people. And so they say, oh, it's our job to protect and serve and to keep people safe. And so they really view themselves as like an army, right, of protectors. But really, it's an army of oppressors that they've done, right? And so that's something that is embedded in, I would say, in militarism. So you see it also intertwined materially. We've seen it. There's this thing called Operation Legend, by which local law enforcement agencies can access and are provided with military grade equipment. Um, I remember vividly in 2020, the small municipality right next to Milwaukee called Wauwatosa,
Hmm.
they had tanks, and tanks pointed at residents, right? We were marching for justice for people that were killed by the same law, the same police officer from Wauwatosa. He had killed three people in Wauwatosa in a span of like 5 years, I think. And we were marching right in solidarity with the families and people, decrying this killing. And they had tanks. Where did those tanks come from? How do you explain that a small municipality like that has a multi-million-dollar tank with them, right? And not to account for all of the other
Hmm.
arsenal and equipment they have. So something like Operation Legend shows how policing, right? All of these technologies that they have that they deploy in their wars that they fund, right? Whether it's, in the Middle East, whether it was in Afghanistan and Iraq, they're bringing them back home, right? So it's, this proverbial like chickens coming home to roost, and we're finding it in our place and how they view the people who are organizing, people like us in the Milwaukee Alliance. Like I said, they had tanks pointed at us and all this equipment.
Hmm.
So that's one aspect. And the other one that addresses, I think, more importantly today, the connections with who they train with. Law enforcement oftentimes goes and gets training with groups like the Israeli occupation forces. And we see those technologies. We must never forget how it is that Derek Chauvin, who knelt on uh, George Floyd's neck for so many minutes, that style of kneeling on someone, that was the same style and tactics used by the Israelis on Palestinians. And he learned it from them. And so showing that and understanding those material links is really important for us. And that's why in the Milwaukee Alliance and the National Alliance, the question of Palestine has been so, so crucial. It's not just to put an end to it, but also because it's so linked, right, to how it is that policing targets Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people in this country. And so understanding how it is that if we're really going to organize against putting an end to police killing people in our neighborhoods, we must also see it as important for putting an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestine, to putting an end to the occupations everywhere that we see, right? We can see it
Hmm.
in Congo and Sudan and other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean and a lot of other countries where there's that military force presence in occupying and destabilizing communities because we view the police doing that in the local scale on us. And so that's a little bit of how we view these problems. But more importantly, the reason why we understand it in those ways is because it gives us a path forward and understands our organizing in such a powerful way. We know that in order for us to do this work well, of holding the police accountable, of fighting for transparency, we need a very solid organization. And we need an organization that's capable of doing this. And that comes from people who are committed to community and people community committed to stepping away from the individualism that we often are told is what's important in a society. So it really is to organize, it's a labor of love. You can't do this if you don't have love for one another or love for your communities. And without that, you can't really go far. You get easily burned out if you think it's only on you as an individual. You have to, we're going to go through rough moments. I mean, it's really difficult. Like me as the outreach chair, it's often my responsibility to talk with families who have lost loved ones to police violence. And it's heart-wrenching, right? It's devastating. And so there's times where I can feel myself slowly breaking down, just taking on all of that you see, that you witness, that you hear about. But if it wasn't for my friends and my comrades who I organize with, and if I know I can't, I know I can lean on them, sorry. Knowing that, I know that I can keep going because I have people I can lean on, and vice versa, the people can lean on me, and I know that I have to show up for them in those ways. So it's really, that's a little of how we really organize in the Milwaukee Alliance of this, even though we've grown considerably since 2020, but it's still, a smaller group compared to other big organizations of people who really are solid in those ways. Even though it's the quantity is not there, the quality I would say is definitely there that keeps us going. And more importantly, it allows us to work with these families. That's something that I've learned so much over the years of how families that are going through what is just such a difficult moment, such a challenging, horrifying moment of they just lost a loved one to a police shooting, that they're able to take that pain and suffering and channel it towards something productive. Um, if it wasn't for, the families of people like Dontre Hamilton, who was killed in 2014 by Milwaukee police, family of Alvin Cole, who was killed in 2020, and the families of these people that came together with us and told us, look, we want to know what happened to our loved ones, and we need policy around transparency, around footage release. If it wasn't for them being able to come with us and help us drive those things forward, we would not have been able to push for that policy, which is now in place in Milwaukee, where footage has to be released of critical incidents involving police. It's not the end all be all, right? It won't stop police killings, but there is an element of transparency that wasn't there without these families becoming fighters for justice amidst, right, those difficult moments. So I know if they can do it, I know I can do it, right? Like I have no excuse if these, and it's often what's fascinating, it's often mothers and sisters who end up doing it because the fathers or the other male figures are oftentimes also taken away from the communities through incarceration. And so we're oftentimes fighting with like the families that are, these are usually the mothers, we call them the mothers of the movement, who come together with us. And it's been honestly an honor working with them closely to continue to do that. And so that's something we're really working towards, of working with them, because what's beautiful is seeing how they understand their case, even as an individual case. They view it as connected to so much else. They say, even though I can't necessarily get justice for my son or my child, I know that by pushing for these changes, it will be a form of justice because I want to prevent other ones from happening. So there's also that future orientation they have of they want to put an end to this in the future. And though it might not directly impact them anymore due to their conditions, they care so deeply for this. And that's really why we continue to do it. So it's a long work in progress. We're fighting for this, accountability from law enforcement. We want that community control where people can determine their own fates. We don't want that military style intervention in our communities, just how we fight for the Palestinian struggle, where we want the Palestinians to be liberated to determine their future and their understanding. We want our communities to be able to define themselves in their own image, in their own understanding, communities of care, communities of love, communities that say, hey, those resources that are coming to our city, we want them to build beautiful gardens. We want them to build beautiful educational spaces, whether it's a much better school than what they have, and whatnot, right? Like if you talk to people in our community, that's what they want. And so being able to fight, and so and our understanding, to close, the current work we do around whether it's the police or the county jail and putting an end to those killings, to that violence that is done to our communities, is really not just to put an end to it, but to create a future in which we can then allow our communities to flourish. And that's also linked to putting an end to how it is that, again, those connections, breaking that chain of the connection between policing and the military interventions abroad. So it's going to require a lot, but it's something that we're very passionate about, and we're going to continue fighting for in the Milwaukee Alliance. So again, thank you all so much for listening to me and for inviting me to speak. But I'll end it now so we can have some more discussion as well. Thank you.